Lewis Jackson sat with all his fellow students in the dingy underground lecture hall, listening to a rickety old professor with a voice like chloroform, rattling off dry facts about economics. Above him, a projector older than any of the students in the room covered the wall in a poorly designed PowerPoint presentation, limping from slide to slide. It was 9 a.m. on a thoroughly unremarkable Monday. Half the class was hungover. The other was just terminally bored. Lewis hoped none of this would come up on the final, because this morning, he had no intention of listening. Instead, he was typing out a message under the desk with a big, stupid grin on his face. Professor Harbison is going off about the free market again. Save me. Send. The message's recipient, Jenny Park, started typing. Lewis's crush on Jenny was the college's worst-kept secret. Ever since they met during O Week, he'd been infatuated with her. They shared a few classes, but little by little, they started hanging out more in their free time. Study sessions, grabbing lunch together, going to the movies. They'd become fast friends, but Lewis was hoping they could be something more, and he hoped deep down Jenny was thinking the same thing. He received a text. "We can hang out in the quad after if it makes him easier to endure. We'll grab burgers. My treat," with a winking emoji. Lewis felt like a dork to admit it, even to himself, but this message made his heart race. They were doing winking emojis now. Maybe today wouldn't be such a drag after all. Any day that he got to hang out with Jenny couldn't be all that bad. All this news was so exciting to him, he didn't notice that something strange was sweeping over the lecture hall. While the professor droned on, even the most studious members of the class were suddenly checking their phones, faces alight with expressions of confusion, then concern, then worry. Something was happening, something big. Professor Harbison fell silent as a new sound rose to prominence, muffled at first but getting rapidly louder just outside the lecture hall. It was screaming, terrible screams of fear and pain. People started to rise out of their seats. What was going on out there? Nobody had heard gunshots or an explosion. The ground wasn't rumbling under their feet, and if a hurricane or tornado was tearing its way across the campus, they would have heard it. Suddenly, the main doors to the lecture hall burst open, and a terrified student rushed through. Lewis recognized him. It was Tommy Lansdale, a history major that Lewis had hung out with a few times at campus parties. He was a chill guy, the kind of person who took everything on the chin and let life's troubles just roll off his back. That's why it was so strange to see his whole body shaking and his face a red mess of tears. "You can't go out there," he screamed. "There's something wrong with the light." Concern was starting to give way to panic. Tommy turned and shoved the bolt into place on the door, eliminating the potential exit. The only other way out was a fire escape down by the stage. His heavy breathing and choked sobs weren't doing much to calm anyone down. Lewis checked his phone again. Jenny was still typing. Tommy kept repeating, "Something's wrong with the light, something's wrong with the light, something's wrong with the light." The other students were starting to approach him, all with a sense of guarded caution, given they still didn't understand the situation well enough to know for sure that Tommy wasn't the dangerous one here. College could be an extremely stressful place. It definitely wasn't unheard of for people to snap under the pressure and do something they wouldn't normally do. What's going on, man?" Lewis said, walking briskly up to Tommy, worried about Jenny's safety if something really was happening out there. Tommy raised both hands in a gesture that seemed halfway between pleading and a threat, shaking his head frantically. "Stay back, dude. You don't want to go out there. Something terrible is happening." Professor Harbison approached, adjusting his glasses and sneering. He didn't take kindly to someone interrupting his lecture with these ridiculous theatrics. An institute of learning was no place for this kind of troublemaker. "I demand you leave this instant, young man," Harbison said. "If you don't stop this foolish behavior, I'll have you written up." Tommy didn't budge. He just shook his head emphatically. "I'm not going anywhere," he said. "If you go out there, you're gonna die. I'm not letting anyone leave this damn building." Before anyone could protest this unwilling confinement, a terrible sound started to come from outside. Not screaming this time, just a voice. A warped, pained voice that seemed almost to droop as it spoke, like a voice recorded on an old reel-to-reel tape recorder that's starting to degrade. "Help me," it slurred.
Please, let me in. I feel so sick.
There was a terrible slopping noise, like a thick, viscous liquid sluicing closer. Tommy looked down and screamed. Flesh-colored slime was slithering in underneath the door and dripping over the top step of the gangway. Tommy stepped back, along with everyone else. It looked revolting and smelled even worse, like a mixture of rotten meat and burning hair. That terrible, drooping voice was still somehow emanating from the slime.
Please help me. Something went wrong.
Naturally, the other students began to scream and run. Whatever that monster was, they needed to get away from it quickly. Only Lewis seemed to be rooted in place, the terror and impossibility of it all just paralyzing him. He could only watch as the flesh-colored blob creature seeped in under the door. Everything else, including Professor Harbison, who was moving faster than he had in years, made a mad dash for the fire exit down by the stage. Tommy screamed for them to stay inside, but it was already too late. People panicked and piled on top of each other to get out, but the second they did, the worst of the screaming started. The most awful, agonized wails you've ever heard that tapered off in that same drooping gurgle as the blob slithered in underneath the door. It was Lewis's natural instinct to run down and help somehow, but instead he felt Tommy's white-knuckle grip on his shoulder.
I'm sorry,
Tommy said through the sobs.
It's too late for them. There's nothing you can do, man. We just need to stay inside.
At that moment, Lewis received a text message from Jenny. It read, "Lewis, if you're still okay, you need to read this and you need to believe me. Something terrible has happened. So many people are dead, or at least I think they're dead. A lot of them are still screaming. I think it has something to do with the sun. Stay out of the light. I'm in Administration Building C. I'm safe for now, but I'm hiding. Don't come looking for me until nightfall. Please let me know if you're okay. You can't trust the sun." Lewis felt a wave of relief and terror wash over him. Jenny was okay, and that was great news. But it seemed like this nightmare, whatever the hell it was affecting everyone out there. It was a force melting people down and turning them into monsters. The screams from outside the door were getting worse. All those people who had been, well, people so recently were something entirely different now, and they were in terrible, terrible pain. Lewis and Tommy ran down to the fire escape next to the stage and forced it shut, trying not to look at the tide of liquid flesh that was rolling in the apparently hostile sun outside. They were lost now. Tommy and Lewis didn't want them coming back in. Lewis breathed a rattling sigh and hammered out a reply to Jenny. "I'm safe in a lecture hall with Tommy Lansdale. We'll come to you as soon as we can. Don't worry, it's all gonna be okay." Lewis shoved his phone back into his pocket. Now isn't the time to keep checking. He asked Tommy what he knew, how he had survived, whatever all this was. Having some kind of knowledge about what they were dealing with might have given them a better chance of surviving. Tommy had just finished up a seminar in a nearby classroom and was headed over to the canteen to grab a Reuben while preparing for his next class. He was lucky enough to be under a covered walkway, bathed in the early morning shade, when something about the sun changed. It was hard to even describe. A certain shift in the quality of the light, a kind of shimmer, almost. It didn't affect him, but the people in the courtyard a few feet away. He was shuddering as he told the next part of the story. He swallowed hard over a lump in his throat, staring off into the distance with a haunted look as the memories played over his mind. Tommy described the people in the courtyard, the ones out of the shade who were first exposed. They just started screaming and falling apart, losing form, melting, becoming awful piles of shapeless slop on the ground. It was instantaneous, and all it seemed to take was a fraction of a second of sun exposure for the whole process to take effect. Nothing was worth the risk of exposure to something like that. Nothing. But Lewis disagreed. There was one thing worth risking his life or the integrity of his body for: Jenny. They had to get to Administration Building C as quickly as possible. And not just because of the new threat raging outside, but because Building C already had a certain reputation. Rumor had it that a number of people had gone missing in that building back in the 1970s. Since then, people had experienced strange, inexplicable things, odd chills, strange noises, creeping feelings of doom in certain areas. In short, it was the last place Lewis wanted Jenny to be trapped, but neither he nor Tommy could help until night fell. Seeing as they wouldn't be great rescuers in a semi-liquid state, they waited for 10 torturous hours in that lecture hall, as day turned to night outside. In that time, they heard so many terrible bubbling screams out there. Pain trying to escape a slimy prison. It was enough to drive you mad with fear. Both checked the news and their Twitter feeds on their phones, hoping to find out if there was any more information on what was happening out there. It seemed the worst had come to pass. This insane phenomenon was unfolding everywhere. People across the world were suffering under the transforming rays of the terrible new sun. Some group called the SCP Foundation was releasing information about it, telling people to come towards their buildings at night for safety. Lewis committed this fact to memory. When they'd collected Jenny, they'd head straight to one of these buildings. Hopefully, someone out there could tell them what the hell was going on here. Someone out there had to have answers about all of this. When it got dark outside, Lewis felt his phone buzz in his pocket as he received another text from Jenny. This time it was, "Lewis, I'm scared. Please come quickly. I'm downstairs." And with that, Lewis knew it was time to leave. He and Tommy steeled themselves, and when they were sure it was dark out, they ventured forth from the lecture hall and onto the quad. There they saw the aftermath of the horrors that the sun had wrought. The grass was covered in more huge, flesh-colored blobs, slithering across the grass like mutant slugs. Just the sight of them made Lewis and Tommy feel nauseous, but they didn't have time to stop and take a breather. If Jenny was in trouble, they needed to get to Building C fast. It looked even more frightening at night. It occurred to both Lewis and Tommy at that moment that neither of them had ever actually been inside this building before, and what seemed like the end of the world was certainly an interesting time to start. Lewis and Tommy entered the building and turned on the lights in the lobby. They heard a voice at first, oddly toneless and robotic, but soon realized it was a video playing on loop on the computer at the unmanned reception desk. It was another message from the SCP Foundation.
"This is a public service announcement from the SCP Foundation. We are commandeering all broadcast channels and frequencies to deliver a vital message. Avoid sunlight at all costs. Cover your bodies thoroughly and follow the instructions on the screen to reach the nearest operational SCP Foundation containment site."
Neither liked the sound of the phrase containment site, but they'd worry about the semantics later. Jenny had said she'd been hiding downstairs, and there was no sign of her here on the first floor, so it stood to reason she was on some kind of basement level. Strange. It seemed like all the doors here led up, except one. A door that looked like, until very recently, it had been bolted to the wall. "Well," Lewis said, trying to mask his fear, "I guess it's now or never." Tommy opened his mouth to answer, but before a single word could pass his lips, a huge, fleshy tendril shot through the front door of the building and wrapped around his throat. He managed only a choked gasp as it dragged him back towards the door. On the other side of the threshold, a mountain of flesh eagerly waited. A gibbering nightmare of half-formed faces screamed and wailed in the terrible fleshy form. It happened so quickly that Lewis couldn't even hope to save him. He was gone, subsumed by the blob, his face disappearing into the flesh before Lewis could even scream. But there was no time to stop and process the shock. Another several tendrils were already reaching for him. He could practically see it happening in slow motion, pulsing, grasping for him. Perhaps it was only his will to see Jenny again that gave him the strength to do so, but he dodged the tendrils by a fraction of an inch and dove towards the door, the same door he assumed Jenny had escaped into hours earlier. He threw open the door and disappeared behind it, slamming it in place and holding it fast. He could feel the tendrils smashing up against it, hammering away. Lewis heard all those terrible, deranged voices screaming for him on the other side. He was holding it for a solid 10 minutes before the creature finally gave up and slithered away. The second the silence fell, Lewis's phone buzzed in his pocket again. He fished it out and saw another message from Jenny. It read, "Please come. Afraid. So dark here. So dark here. So dark here. So dark here." And it was at that moment that Lewis began to take in his new surroundings. He was standing in a stairwell, one that seemed much older and more dilapidated than even the rest of the building. But most notable of all was the fact that he had never, ever seen a place so dark, impossibly dark. Not dark as in the absence of light, but dark as in an almost physical presence choking out the light. Even with his phone on full power, the light didn't penetrate much of the black. Was Jenny all the way down here? Lewis was afraid. He could only imagine how Jenny was feeling down there in the depths. He took a deep breath and started descending down into the darkness, using his phone camera to light what little of the way was possible. The deeper he got, the more he started to feel a strange, intangible dread beginning to creep in, like an invisible hand compressing his chest. As he got deeper, he noticed a sound, quiet weeping, an unmistakably female voice somewhere down below. It sounded too young to be Jenny, but then again, Lewis had never actually heard her cry before. Whatever the case, he needed to get down there and remedy the situation. He forged on further and further into the dark. Even as his terrible sense of dread increased, he couldn't help but notice that no matter how far down he went, it always sounded like the crying was the same distance away. It unnerved him, but Jenny had to be down there. She had to be, and even if he gave up on her, it's not like he could just go back up and leave. There were monsters out there, like the monster that had gotten Tommy. Even down here in the darkness, he was safer than up there, or at least, that's what he thought. He felt something strange under his foot and looked down. It was an old piece of torn up orange fabric with D9884 written on it. The phone buzzed again, a new message from Jenny. This time it read, "I can see you. Can you see me?" Lewis looked around. He couldn't see anything. He tried desperately calling Jenny again. He yelled her name until his voice went hoarse. No reply. Just that same soft weeping so far below. Maybe she was on the flight below him. She must have been close. He doubled his speed, vaulting down the stairs to the next level, when he noticed something on the ground. A smartphone. One that, over so many study dates, lunches, and outings to the movies, he learned to recognize. It was Jenny's. He picked it up, studying it, only to see that it was dead. The screen cracked and the battery lifeless. His own phone gave another buzz. A text from Jenny. It read, "Look down." And against all rational thought, that's exactly what he did. There was something at the bottom of the stairs. A strange, pale face somehow illuminated in the darkness. At first he thought it could have been her and ran towards it. By the time he realized he was wrong, and he was staring into the blank eyes of a face without a mouth inches from his own face, it was already too late. Lewis let out a scream. There was nobody there to hear him. But on the bright side, at least he never would see that sunlight again. Now go check out The Secret at the Bottom of SCP-087 Explained and SCP-087 Trapped in the Stairwell for more tales of the terrible things that happen when you enter a certain anomalous stairwell.